Today is Wednesday, June 18th, 2025, and this is episode 310 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm getting through a week, It's Wednesday. It's hump day. It's been a long week, but it's only Wednesday. But hey, I'm here, so. And it's better because I'm talking to you now.
Absolutely. And, it's not like there's anything else going on in the world right now. Like just slow times. Yep.
It's boring. Completely boring. I don't even know what the news, why they even come on. There's nothing to cover. Just human interest stories.
Yeah. Like skateboarding dogs and stuff. Right.
Right. Little old lady dropped her pie out the window,
Oh,
Billy won a trophy at school.
Well, on the cyber front, the news never stops. So that's why we're still here.
News never, ever, ever stops. Those bad guys keep being bad guys.
They do. And they keep finding new ways to be bad. So before we get into that, though, I do want to remind a couple of people of a few things. One is that the thoughts and opinions we express are ours and not those of our employers. Number two, I want to say thank you very much for our continued Patreon sponsors. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And then number three, happy belated Father's Day to all the dads out there. And yeah.
You included.
Thank you. Anyhow, so let's jump into some stories. We have a couple of interesting ones today. First one comes from Bleeping Computer. And the title here is Sentinel-1 shares new details on China-linked breach attempt. This is based on a press release or a research release that Sentinel-1 published, which was a follow-up to yet another research release that they published a while ago. And the details of it are interesting. There's, they're kind of following a couple different threat actors that were apparently targeting other entities in order to get to them. At least that's their hypothesis. And I thought it was worth talking about for a minute because, we have seen in the past, we had the big CrowdStrike outage last year. We saw SolarWinds be weaponized by bad actors. We've seen instances in the past, and this Sentinel-1 goes to great lengths, by the way, in both this article and in their actual report to point out that they were not harmed in the making of this news. So this is all a big chest thumping.
We're fine.
Exercise.
Nothing to see here. Look what we defended against. They tried, but we stopped them. It's all good.
Right. But I thought it was interesting to talk a little bit for a moment about security tooling as a weakness. I think we're starting to see more examples of tooling like this being abused by bad actors. Now, certainly we see it, I think, much more frequently on some of the particularly like open source packages and whatnot that are being victimized and used to distribute malicious code and gain a foothold inside other organizations. Although I think most of that still seems to be in the realm of like trying to get in Bitcoin wallets and stuff like that. It's very clear that when a threat actor is going after a company like Sentinel-1, unless Sentinel-1 is the end victim, but I don't think it is. I actually do expect that the intention here was to get at some of Sentinel-1's customers. They are implicitly trusted by their customers, and also furthermore, they're the methodology that their customers are using to detect bad stuff happening in their environment. And so if it turns out to be the source of that bad stuff, it's kind of double bad because it's not only happening, but you're kind of presumably going to be blind to it. And I don't know that we're really well prepared for this, future, if I can phrase it that way.
Well, maybe we need EDR for EDR.
Yeah, kind of like we have the firewall for our firewall, yes.
Right. No, you're right. This is something we've kicked around theoretically for a long time, especially like it first occurred to me when we were talking about vulnerability management tools that are scanning your systems, usually with admin level access to assess missing patches and such. And it can touch everything from one centralized source. It usually has very high privilege access into that environment. And if that were to be weaponized, that would be ugly. Right. So I agree. I think more and more of these companies like this, probably the bad actors, and it's probably, as they assert here, China or nation state level, is interested in either ways to get around Sentinel-1 because they have a target that's using Sentinel-1 and they want to have insight into how to defeat it, or they want to do some supply chain attacks through Sentinel-1 into their target environments, which would be devastatingly powerful if they were able to pull it off. And I have no insight into what the security team is like at Sentinel-1. Hopefully it's robust. Hopefully they invested well there. And clearly this sort of documentation seems to show it. I will say, having worked in internal IT security roles for cybersecurity companies in the past, occasionally you run into the situation where the cobbler's children have no shoes. I don't know that that's the case anymore, especially with these types of companies that are so deeply embedded at such a low level in the operating system that hopefully they take these things very seriously, at least more seriously than I saw when I was in some of those roles in the past.
Yeah, my experience has been there's an over reliance on their own tooling, and they
have to eat their own dog food.
Yeah, they have to eat their own dog food.
Yep.
And they often believe their own marketing, and their own marketing is that no one in the market is as smart as us.
Right.
And we're above the fray. We can see it all. We can defend it all. And that is, that's just it's just the way it is. I think that's not unique to any one company, or probably even any industry.
Yeah, I mean, think if you're the CISO, or maybe just a senior person in security at Sentinel-1, and you want to say go buy a potential competitor's tool to help defend your corporate environment. How well do you think that conversation is going to go with your CFO and CEO?
Does not go well, and because look, I've been in a position where I've done it, and it's viewed as you are enriching your direct competition. Your desire to use their product is helping to fund their next version, which is going to take money away from us.
Yep.
So
working IT security for a cybersecurity vendor is a special kind of hell.
It really is. It really is. I think it goes off the rails, at least in my experience. Yeah. I don't know if you've had a similar experience. Is that what we just talked about is, it's obvious and I think self-explanatory, but where it really becomes a problem is that the security ecosystem is huge, and most organizations don't have, product sets or services or solutions for each of those areas. And so, my experience has been struggling with trying to get something that's adjacent, might not be a direct competitor, but the company, your company, your security company believes that, look, we have our thing, and that means that you don't need that other thing. We tell our customers that because you bought our thing, you don't need to go buy this other thing. And so here you are saying, that you've got to go spend money on this other thing. And how does that look to our customers?
Yeah. Yep, I've seen that. I've also seen another interesting one where I have no idea if this is accurate. I'm just picking out names because they're top of mind. Sentinel-1, let's say they go buy Wiz to help do cloud management. Wiz, when it first came out, was purely doing, in essence, API-based analysis of AWS, GCP, Azure, and telling you where your problems were. That was it. Well, since then, so it wasn't really a competitor to Sentinel-1 in a in a general sense. But since then, Wiz has expanded into areas that are direct competitors to SentinelOne. They have an endpoint agent now, which is a direct competitor to what SentinelOne does in the cloud environments, and Wiz Defend. And again, I have no insight and insider knowledge. I'm just looking at this as an outsider watching these two companies, being familiar with both of their tool sets. And now, let's say you're leveraging Wiz to help you manage your configurations and baselines of vulnerabilities in cloud environment, and then suddenly you can't renew because now they're a competitor. So one of your key technologies that help you defend your environment or protect your environment just became off limits because they have entered your space. That gets really complicated. I think if you're, a senior level person trying to navigate all that complexity, if you're in the corporate cyber side of some of these security vendors.
Oh yeah. I think we're far enough away from it happening. I can share a funny anecdote from back in the ISS days. When we signed a partnership with, I believe it was with McAfee, and this, by the way, was like pre-EDR times, so like
right. John McAfee was still alive and slightly less crazy at the time.
yes, much less crazy, I think, as I recall. Anyway, we signed we were using, I think, Symantec. The details are a little murky, but we were using Symantec, and we signed this partnership with McAfee, and so we, of course, we couldn't be enriching the competition of our most valued partner, which was McAfee. So we had to move post haste our internal infrastructure off of Symantec and onto McAfee, and that was a giant pain in the ass because none of these things are ever like one for one. There's always some rough edges that you have to file off. And I don't think it was 6 months, and that McAfee relationship soured, and they revoked our licenses, and we had to move back to Symantec in like an emergency basis. And that is some of the challenges that can happen in, I think, IT companies where you have these business partnerships that can drive the the technology that you are required to use. And it's also why I've been a very staunch opponent to picking technology based on the whims of what, who a particular partner is. No, I mean, certainly, look, if you own a piece of technology, it's hard to argue that you shouldn't use it. But my point is that relationships come and go. And when you're setting your technology strategy on something that could be gone in 6 months, it's a hard thing.
100%. I remember that McAfee Symantec two-step very well. It's at least 10% of my gray hair, maybe 5%. I've seen a lot of bad stuff since then. I couldn't agree more. And I have actually fought this so hard in other roles of not trying to get into quid pro quo deals with your partners, but it happens so often. These business negotiations happening at a very senior level typically include if it makes sense, like if there's a possibility for it, some sort of reciprocal purchase agreement, so both people can realize revenue and show the value. But to people like us on the ground, those implicit costs are never calculated and not included, and we're just at the whims of whatever relationship situation is going on. Like I see that all the time. I can't talk about details, but I see it in my current job all the time where, we're a company I work for now. It's not a secret. It sells software for salespeople. So we'll be trying to sell into a sales team of a vendor who immediately wants to turn around and sell into us as part of the deal. And it happens all the time. And it's a really complex thing to navigate. I'm not going to name names. I don't want to breach any confidences here, but it becomes very ethically challenged because at that point now your deals are now intertwined. And let's say we sell into Bob's budget EDR shop and they sell into us, and then we don't want to renew or they don't want to renew. What happens to the other side of that deal? It gets a lot more complicated. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that you're making the best decision for your own company long term if you're making that kind of deal. But man, I can tell you, any executives who are not in cyber who are listening to this are probably screaming at their podcast device about how wrong and stupid I am and how that relationship is more important. This is the way things get done. But it makes our lives a lot more difficult.
Yeah. Well, I think it also, I mean, it obviously makes our lives difficult, but it also is, I think, problematic because this, in your example, so you've established a relationship with Bob's budget EDR, and suddenly now, Ed's EDR comes along, and you sign a bigger deal with.
Yeah, good point.
Right, and so now what do you do?
Install them both.
Obviously, so
you know what?
The only right answer.
I shelfware, man.
Mm-hmm.
It gets bought and sits on a shelf.
Yeah.
Which again, not great.
Anyway, I think the premise of picking technology based on the whims of that sort of relationship thing can be problematic. I understand that there's legitimate business reasons why you would need to and want to do that, but I think we all have to be cognizant of the challenges that can come along with it, and perhaps it can be mitigated through better contracting in that partnership, which, unfortunately never does include the security teams. My experience. But back to this one, I thought it was very interesting that the way in which the threat actor here was trying to get into the SentinelOne was through a vendor who, as far as I can tell, they're a little coy about the terminology, but was provisioning workstations for their employees, which is not an uncommon thing to do. If you're a company of any size, you probably aren't provisioning your own workstations. You've probably outsourced that to someone. And if that company becomes a weak spot, then conceivably that could cause some problems for you. As with anything that has any organization that has access to that sort of sensitive infrastructure for your organization, you should have the right sets of controls in place, or make sure that they have the right sets of controls in place, and you have kind of complementary controls to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. And SentinelOne, I got to give them credit; like they caught it and they've written about it, and now we're all better for it. But the net point is, like, these vendors are being targeted by more advanced threat actors right now to go after their customers who are us. That's my point.
Yeah, that's good. One note I took that we haven't covered yet, pretty deep in the article, they talk about the Purple Haze and Shadowpad campaigns and their tactics and techniques. And one of them is, quoting from the article, the attackers used a PowerShell-based exfiltration script that performs a recursive search for sensitive user documents, archives them in a password-locked 7-zip archive, and exfiltrates them. And I just had to think, once again, password-protected zip files defeating the best DLP and anti-malware technology on the market.
Your $1 million, $1 million+
of DLP, a password-protected zip file. And it's been this way for 30 years.
Yep.
Now, you can set them to block them if they can't open them. Like, you do have the option, but nobody sets that.
Yeah, I still come back to, because I think in that context, it was systems that were being uploaded to infrastructure servers. I don't remember if that was landing on user workstations or not, but blocking unsolicited outbound connections, I think, is something that I don't know that we do enough of.
No, it takes a lot of knowledge and confidence in your environment to be willing to do that. It's so rare, especially with a bunch of cloud providers, man. By default, they're block all in, allow all out, just by default. And I don't know that people know enough about their infrastructure to successfully block things.
I can tell you, I was at a cloud provider most recently, and that is viewed as a customer sat issue. Like, if you block outbound access, this is not a different discussion than mandating people use two-factor authentication on their cloud accounts. It's inconvenient. It's a speed bump. You provision your server and suddenly you can't download updates because it's blocked. So there's an incentive, I think, for cloud providers to maybe not have the best default configurations in place.
Yeah, and I can see the same thing. Like if you've got like SREs as example running your cloud environments, and they don't know every application that's being set up that they're being asked to set up, and all the comms that it might have, and what ports it might run on. And back in the day when we had really tight firewall rules, this was tough. We had to spend a lot of time watching for drops and being willing to tolerate stuff being slow to set up and not a lot of change. Things happen so fast now. I don't know that if I went to most of my vendors and said, give me a list of all your outbound traffic, a lot of them just wouldn't know how to answer that question. All UDP, TCP, and ICMP ports. Thanks.
Yeah. What kills me though, if you go and you take any security education, whether it's CISSP, Security Plus, or anything like, one of the platitudes you're taught is only allow traffic which has a valid business need. And when you hear, well, we need all ports to all IP addresses in order for this application to function, and I have to run this application, therefore it's a valid business need. That has bothered me for damn near 30 years. And it's 2025, and I'm still complaining about it.
And we'll do it next year too.
I know. So next story comes from the Hacker News, and the title here is New Supply Chain Malware Operation Hits NPM and PyPI Ecosystem is Targeting Millions Globally. And this is not like, it's a different one from all the others that we've covered in the past, because I feel like I say PyPI on this show at least a couple times a month for years. So there's a number of different incidents included in this particular article, but the most concerning one is up at the top, and it's related to GlueStack. And GlueStack is an interface component, if I'm not mistaken. There's anything in my estimation that's particularly novel about the attack. The method this happened by was the personal access token of one of their developers was somehow leaked. I'm going to guess it was included in a file they uploaded to GitHub, but that's just pure hypothesis. And an adversary was able to taint builds for a pretty significant number of these packages. And they looks like they were focused on like cryptocurrency mining, but the malware had capabilities to steal information. And anyway, it's not exactly known what the objective of the threat actor was with these, because all they could see was this kind of generic piece of malware being included, and it was downloaded like thousands of times. The thing that when it made me see red when I read this was that was the author, the maintainer of these packages, simply deprecated that package. And they marked it as, trying to find the exact wording they used. Anyway, they left it to the consumers of these packages to roll back to a known good version, rather than releasing a new version, like an incremented version number that is fixed, so that when you next run your build, and it by default would pull the next available version, they're putting it on the maintainers of any software that relies on these packages to roll back to a prior version, which means that they have to know that this happened, and they have to know that they have to roll back. And it seems like this was the wrong way to go about it. Now, I'd love to hear if I'm wrong on this. Like, is there a reason why? Maybe I just don't understand, but this seems like the exact wrong way to manage this.
Yeah, I agree. And I found the quote you're looking for. Quote, the project maintainers have since revoked the access token and marked the impacted versions as deprecated. Users who may have downloaded the malicious versions are recommended to roll back to a safe version to mitigate any potential threats. So, yeah. Basically.
So my expectation in Jerryland, what would have happened is the maintainer would have cleaned, I'm assuming they didn't have anything new, but they would have released a version increment that may have been the exact same as the prior version before it was contaminated. But that way, again, when somebody else came along and some consumer of these packages came along and was rebuilding their software, by default, automatically, their tooling would pull in the latest version, which would be clean. So that is, I think, problematic. And hopefully this is not a common practice. Look, if you're an open source developer and this happens, please don't do it. That's my ask of you. So there you go. There's a couple of other quote supply chain type compromised packages that are I think they're much more garden variety. They're interesting in what they do. Like there was a couple packages whose sole purpose was, it looks like a very novel way to synchronize databases using an API, which, as somebody who maintains some sites and would love an easy way to replicate databases, sounds like an amazing thing. However, when you install it, its only purpose, in fact, is to actually wipe your disk, which is,
helpful in very specific circumstances, not helpful when you're not planning for it.
Correct. So yeah, I didn't think there's really no particular discussion about how these things happen, but I wanted to rail on the way this was responded to.
Yeah, I was trying to read through their comments as we were talking live here, so I apologize that I didn't prepare better for this. And they do talk about this in their plan and their commitment and how they, we understand how critical trust is in open source. We're taking this breach very seriously. They have a lot of good things they're doing here. They're revoking all the compromised tokens. They're removing all NPM access for affected users and contributors. They're revoking GitHub repository access for non-essential contributors. They're enabling two-factor auth for publishing and GitHub access. They're reverting the malicious NPM release to a clean, verified version, deprecating the compromised packages to ensure they aren't accidentally used. Check your package lock JSON and yarn.lock files to ensure no compromised versions are installed. Update to the latest verified version from NPM. So it feels like there's maybe a thing that says, give me the latest verified versus just latest. Honestly, I don't know. I feel like I'm fumbling around in the dark on this one, but the way this reads is it may be that there is some mechanism for give me the latest verified version, and that will get you back to a safe version.
It could very well be, and if that's the case, I apologize, and I take rant
on, my friend.
But if not, so what you just described, by the way, is, I think, outside of my rant, I think is the right response. Like, they did all the right things. It's unfortunate that it happened, but I thought their response was reasonable.
Typically, we increment to a new version.
Yes. Just
to make it very clear that we increment the version number in some way.
Correct. Anyway, so moving on to our next story. This one comes from CSO Online, and the title here is CISOs Beware. Gen AI use is outpacing security controls.
Shocker.
Holy cow. So this is based on a report that shows that organizations use an average of 6.6 high-risk generative AI applications. And they describe or characterize high risk as those that have otherwise been blocked by the organization.
Interesting criteria.
Yeah. So it's actually a very, I thought, pretty good treatment of the problem space. One of the really sticky issues is that not all of your exposure happens on the devices that you control. And so, one of the things they're pointing out here is that, like, people, you might block, let's just say hypothetically, you block people from using ChatGPT because you really don't want them to use ChatGPT and leak like anything about your company into ChatGPT. But then they go home, and on their home computer, they're asking ChatGPT how to do something related to their job. And, that might be, help me create a presentation. How do I grow our sales? Whatever the case might be. And they actually go on to point out that the exposure from any one person might be somewhat limited, but the fact is that you have perhaps lots of different people from the same organization all asking questions of ChatGPT from their home computers, building kind of this perhaps profile of your organization that is creating information that you would not want to have existing outside of your boundaries. So it was an interesting challenge. And realistically, other than education, I don't know what you do about that. Like that is, you're not gonna take control over people's home computer. It's just not going to happen. Now, the one thing that I was, it's a really good article. It talks about, a lot of different challenges that organizations have. They talks about how pervasive, for example, the use of writing assistants like Grammarly is, and there's lots of alternatives, and a lot of people don't realize that. At least I didn't realize that Grammarly, transits the stuff that you're writing off into their cloud to help you rewrite it. It's not done on device. I don't know if there's an option to have it done on device or not, but that's a problem.
I think that's the case with almost all of those types of tools, though. It's very rarely done on device. Very rarely. You might as well assume it's going to the cloud.
Right, because otherwise the model would have to be pulled down to your computer, and the model is their secret sauce. And do you really want that leaking into out into the wild? So anyway, that was, I think that was interesting. But when I read the whole thing, this reminds me so much of the shadow IT discussion in the cloud and SaaS applications that we had discussions about 10, 12, 15 years ago, where, employees had missions to accomplish, and their IT department or security department, as the case may be, were so unresponsive or not facilitating enough that they went off and solutioned things on their own. And it became such a problem that we actually came up with a name for it in Shadow IT. And now obviously there's we call it Shadow AI. I think it's really still Shadow IT. But I think one of the challenges is that it's an example of an unmet need, right? The employees are using it for a purpose. And they actually go on to point out that even companies who explicitly ban the use of generative AI end up inadvertently incentivizing the use of generative AI, because the people who use generative AI in their jobs are often more productive. They're coming up with ideas or materials that are better than some of their cohorts. Now, I know that's going to be perhaps a controversial statement, but that's what they're pointing out in the article in this report. So this creates kind of this perverse incentive where companies on the one hand are saying don't use generative AI as a matter of policy, but on the other hand, they're actually incentivizing its use through things like, rewards and praise and stuff like that, even though they don't necessarily know that it's as a result of your use of generative AI that's why you earned it. Yeah,
you're just perceived as a better employee.
Right.
More effective in some way. Right. It's a really interesting point. As I was reading this, it just struck me that a couple thoughts. It's too tempting not to use it, right? It's kind of the smoking of the information age. It might be bad for you, but it's just so appealing, right? And
no one wants to admit to it either, by the way.
Right, yeah. The thing that I think this article is really missing, I think it's a pretty good article, but they're missing the whole thing. You said, what can you do about it? There's one thing they're not addressing, which I think is important, which is that you've got to give your employees a sanctioned, safe methodology that meets their needs. or they're going to go find it on their own. So, and some of these generative AI tools, if you go purchase an enterprise level, if you can afford it, they're typically siloed for just your organization. So stuff that your organization is putting in there isn't being used to train the rest of the model. In theory, the leak to another tenant is low probability of happening. And it can, your legal team could be happier, your security team could be happier. So Grammarly is like a great example. If your folks are off personally paying for Grammarly, will come in and buy an enterprise version of something that does the same thing, roll that out, then ban and block Grammarly is how I would recommend you do it. Now, of course, that means
you sign up with Grammarly and you
sure,
have
or
enterprise
keep
terms, right?
Yeah,
but you have contract terms with them.
Right. I no reason to throw them out if it's working. Yeah, great point. So I'm not being anti-Grammarly. I just was thinking differently there. Yeah. So it's tempting not to use it. And here's the other problem: is I think this article is spot on that employees are just so incentivized and they don't see the risk. They don't understand the risk. I think we're probably going to have some major data leaks for this to be taken seriously. And I don't think we're there yet. So I think this is going to get real ugly before it gets better.
I actually think that it is going to become more of a regulatory problem for many organizations before it becomes a breach problem. I mean, I think it will eventually become a data leak problem, but I think what's going to end up happening is, I mean, I'm going to say something really dumb, but HIPAA says you can't bleed any PHI into a generative AI model that you don't have a BAA with, and that's going to happen, right? And so even if no patients were harmed in that, somebody's going to get bit by that. I mean, companies are going to end up getting bit, whether that's, again, HIPAA or GDPR or LGPD or CCPA or, any of the acronyms. I think that's where we're going to start seeing the problems arise first. But, eventually we already saw one issue with DeepSeek, a couple of months ago, right? Where some of their information was disclosed online. But even if the AI companies do a pretty good job, there's lots of tangential issues, like the fact that, well, are they training? Like, is the information that you have leaked into their system, I won't call it their model, but that you've leaked into their system, being used to train the next model, so that the next time somebody comes along and asks a question, it's being answered in part based on information that your employees have provided to it. So I think this is going to be a complicated thing. And the other area that I think that we don't give enough attention to, because is security people. We often think about how can we get hacked? How can we lose data as a result of this? But as a CISO, I also cared about the fact that, if I've got developers using Claude or ChatGPT or one of the others to write code, do I own the copyright? Like, am I able to use the code or images or video or whatever that is created by that model? And the answer is, in some cases, no. And that creates perhaps a big legal exposure.
Yeah, completely agreed. I don't know that the legal side is caught up with this yet. The fact that it can intermingle and be so abstracted out, I think there's a lot to work out there. And I think, to your point, you were talking about HIPAA, reminding me that GDPR is probably much more easy to trigger from a PI leaking across outside Europe or something. The technology certainly outstripped our ability to regulate it. And, I'm not a huge fan of regulations, but I think you're right. I think that there's going to be a whole lot of interesting legal maneuvering as this all plays out. But I go back to, it's too powerful and too tempting. It's going to exist. And it's going to be.
Which I think goes back to, like, do you want people to figure out how to do it on their own? I would paraphrase something that the authors said. They make the comment, you can adopt the ostrich posture, like you can bury your head in the sand and pretend like the problem doesn't exist. Or, as described later in the article, you can just ban it and people will still use it.
Right.
Which, both ends of that spectrum seem very unreasonable. And so you've got to figure out, like, where are you going to be in the middle. Like, and that's, I think, that's where shadow IT and shadow AI lives, is if you're too close to either end of the spectrum. We have to, and maybe this, by the way, is not a IT security thing, or it's not a cybersecurity thing, but as a company, like you ought to be, the security department ought to be, hitting the CIO on the head saying, like, where's our strength? Because, this is putting us at risk. Anyway.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some big problems before it starts to get sorted out, which is not unusual for a net new technology evolution like this. We saw a lot of it when we went to the cloud. This is just happening much faster.
Fun time. So our last story comes from Hacker News also, and the title here is Fin6 uses AWS hosted fake resumes on LinkedIn to deliver more eggs malware. The malware itself, I think, is less interesting than the concept that this is, what we've been talking about for some period of time. And we have recruiters and HR people, hiring managers are, as part of their normal job, they're interacting with candidates, and they have an incentive to open attachments that are provided by candidates. And there's kind of this assumption that they're going to be okay, and they're trustworthy, I guess. But the reality is that this article points out, you don't know who it is. And so this threat actor is creating these fake portfolios that are hosted on AWS inside EC2. And because they're relying on the reputation of AWS, and they've got it set up in such a way that if you visit it from something that doesn't look like a normal web browser on a residential ISP, it actually just gives you back a plain resume in plain text.
That's super clever. It's so clever. Yeah.
But if you use coming from a residential IP address with a recognizable web browser user agent string, then it gives you a package that does actually contain this more eggs malware dropper, which it's kind of I just call it garden variety malware. Again, I think this is going to become, I think this Fin6 is a relatively narrowly focused threat actor. They have a specific type of victim they go after. But I think we're going to start seeing this particular tactic being used much, much more commonly because it works. And I just don't think that beyond like EDR and whatnot, I don't know that we have a great set of mitigations, because you can train people, don't open up attachments from people that you don't know. Well, like, that's their job.
Well, this is where we end up with AI front ends to various recruiting systems that they don't take the live or the raw resume. They're like, upload it here and we'll parse it and we'll strip it out, or make you type it all back in, or that sort of thing is one possible option. But that annoys people. That goes back to, the consumer friction item we were talking about earlier. That's a customer satisfaction issue. Of course, if you're the one trying to get a job, the recruiters don't care as much. But yeah, it's a tough one. The other thing was interesting. I don't know if you had kind of gotten to the end of your narrative, so I don't want to jump in. There was a point of follow-up from AWS, right? So they talk about, this is being hosted in EC2 and S3 buckets. And so AWS's commentary, quote, AWS has clear terms that require customers to use our services in compliance with applicable laws. When we receive reports of potential violations of our terms, we act quickly to review and take steps to disable prohibited content. I'm like, so what AWS is basically saying, look, we put up a sign. Look, and if you want to tell us about somebody doing something bad, sure, we'll go get rid of them eventually. I know that you probably are intimately familiar with this problem, but there's a part of me, it's like, do you take any responsibility for anything at all, AWS? And do you feel any need to take any proactive steps to not have malicious content hosted on your services? Because your reputation is being co-opted for this attack methodology, for this delivery methodology. And you're just shrugging your shoulders going, well, if somebody tells us about it, we'll go look at it. You're supposed to follow the rules. That feels a little...
So this is a really tenuous problem. And so I can argue both sides of it. And I'll tell you, to the extent we could, we looked for sources of telemetry that would point, like proactively, that would point that something hosted in our platform was malicious. So you like whether that's like silent servers or the different threat sources, like run a blank on them, have been out of recorded feature. That's the name I was looking for. So you're looking for, are there known things happening on my IP addresses? Because I know that we talked in the past, lamented in the past about like security scorecard and BitSight and whatnot. And I hate them I don't hate them any less. Let me just be very clear. But the fact that they can show you it can give you a glimpse of what's happening as a provider, what's happening in your infrastructure. That was useful. But on the other side of it, I mean, it's expensive, right? And customers typically don't really like it when you police them. One of the
What they call me up and say you're hosting malware in your environment, or I'd be like, the hell I am. Prove it.
Yeah, or like so that means that you're looking at my files, right? But you told me like that you just store my files, but like the fact that you're telling me that I have malware tells me that you're looking at them.
And, you make a good point. Yeah, you make a good point.
So by the way, I don't mean that to dilute the point that this causes reputational harm to them. And so I do think that there is more that can be done, and it's situational based on what kinds of things we're talking about. This particular one's a little difficult because the threat actor here was being a little clever with how they were presenting their malware. But I do think that providers should have something a little more than we'll take action when someone notifies us. And again, what that is up to.
It definitely felt a little tone deaf, but you're right. It's a very complicated issue. You're a lot closer to it than I am, and I see your point. What are you willing to own? And then are you setting an expectation that you then cannot maintain?
That's the other problem is, you create this moral hazard situation where this was always a problem because like when a critical vulnerability was released, I'm trying to think of a good example. None's coming to mind right now, but an SSH vulnerability or Heartbleed or like, you can pretty well scan your entire environment and tell your customers, hey, look, you've got problems that need to be fixed. And to the extent we identified where that happened, we would notify them. But it definitely creates this moral hazard because what you don't want to leave customers with is this expectation that you are providing that service, like that you are vulnerability scanning them and you are notifying them when they have something that's super important. Because you're not like this is a one-off circumstance. So like we were very careful to word it that way. And I think our customers were appreciative and took it in that spirit. But it is a moral hazard. And so I think that's why, you're starting to see cloud providers that will do it, but it's an add-on service. Like it is a purpose built, whether it's a CSPM or a vulnerability scanner that's tuned to operate in the cloud or what have you. I think, So that's that.
I figured you'd have some interesting insights given your background.
Yeah, and by the way, you jarred my memory. The first story we talked about was with SentinelOne. You brought up the hypothetical about Wiz and SentinelOne and whatnot. And I want to go back to this for a second because Google actually did buy Wiz, right?
Well, pending antitrust approval, which just kind of cropped up the last couple of days that it might get looked at. But yes,
fair point. But it's been announced, and so whether it closes or not, I guess is up for debate. Google already owns Mandiant, and so I am taking bets on whether the new name is going to be Wandiant or Mandiz.
That's the kind of professional level comedy and commentary you get on this show.
Yeah.
How are we not up there with Rogan with that kind of commentary.
InfoSec dad jokes right there.
I am so stunned by the insight. I forgot to even laugh. It was that stunning.
You'll laugh later. I know you'll be like at dinner or you'll wake up right in the middle of the night. You're like, oh my God, I get it now. That's pretty funny.
I'm going to text you at like 3 this morning and be like, damn, that was pro level comedy. That was, wow.
But I live very happy now knowing that there were thousands of people simultaneously groaning in agony there.
Kind of like when your sex tape leaked.
I mean, that was good. That was good stuff. Don't be hating on that, man.
I'm still in therapy, Jerry. I'm still.
So is everybody who's seen it. Yep. Anyway.
Good thing nobody listens this deep into the show.
That's true. That's true. It reminds me of there's been over the years, different companies have like hidden Easter eggs in their click wrap terms and conditions of software. And I can't remember any specific ones, but like they would have giveaways. Like if you read this far, like go to this link and you'll win a prize. And like sometimes they've gone years before anybody has won the prize. So I feel like we're gonna have to do something like that for the perhaps one person that makes it this far into the show
who isn't under duress.
Yeah, exactly. Well, those people don't have internet access, so they won't be able to win the prize anyway.
I mean, the other option is they could just be called Gee Whiz.
See, that would have been better. That was a better joke.
I'm just here to elevate.
Man, this was pretty good.
It is pretty good. It's an interesting world. That's all I can say.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening and putting up with us. I hope this was useful, and I don't even know if anybody's still listening. So, if so, my hat's off to you. You are a strong and hearty soul. Anyhow, thank you again to our Patreon donors. And where can people find you if they would like to get in touch?
Yes. Also, I would echo that. Thanks to our Patreon donors. We, as you guys know, do this as a passion, and it costs money and time. So if you would like to support us, you're welcome to. We would love that. You can find us at Patreon/DefSec. What is it?
Yeah, patreon.com/DefSec. DEFSEC.
Or, of course, on our show page at defensivesecurity.org. You can find me on the various social media sites with the same handle, @Lerg, L-E-R-G, on both infosec.exchange, which is Jerry's amazing Mastodon server, and also still hanging around X. I know a lot of InfoSec people aren't on X, but some of my other passions like aviation and military stuff are on X. So if you wonder why I stick around, it's where the content is that I like. So... and of course, LinkedIn, I usually try to keep an eye on that, though it's so tough to get through the waves of salespeople. But you're welcome to try to hit me up on LinkedIn under Andrew Callett.
Just don't try to sell them anything.
You can try. It just won't work.
You can find me on infosec.exchange. It's at Jerry at infosec.exchange. Just in case it's not obvious, infosec.exchange is in fact the domain name. So there you go.
That's because it's just, lights just turned on.
Yeah, time to grow the gremlins.
All right, Mr. Bell, thanks again for listening, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.